You are listening to a BeachGlass Media podcast.
It's Election Day! Yay! And you know what that means. Citizens of the United States are fighting to keep election integrity strong, and the citizens are voting to save democracy and voting to elect a strong leader that will work hard at unifying the country based upon the country's founding document, the Constitution. And Election Day also means that non-citizens of the United States are voting for Kamala Harris. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. If you have been paying close attention to the super-duper unbiased news media, who have taken a journalistic oath to report the facts, you will have come to find out that Donald Trump has ditched his black suit and red tie for a more appropriate business attire, the Nazi Party uniform. Yes, that's right. The latest photo of Donald Trump can be seen him sporting the same suit Adolf Hitler sported, with the famed swastika on the arm. And, oddly enough, Donald Trump has also adopted a little black mustache underneath his orange nose. When asked about the little black mustache, Trump said, quote, "It's a beautiful mustache, a mustache like no one has ever seen. Elect me as your president, and I promise you I will make the Hitler mustache great again." End quote. But not so fast. We can't elect a fascist into the White House. No, that's dangerous. By golly, that would be evil and corrupt. We can't vote for Donald Trump. What are we thinking? We have to elect the candidate that the American citizens didn't even decide on being a presidential nominee. Yes, why? We shouldn't even be able to vote for candidates anymore. We should just let the government decide our fate. That's right. The government knows what's best for you and for me. I mean, that's how we got Kamala as a presidential nominee, right? Or was it the DEI initiative that did it? Yes, it's true. Donald Trump has experience in the White House and gave us 4 years of peace and no new wars worldwide and 4 years of a great economy with low grocery and gas prices. But come on, let's face the facts. If it wasn't for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris in the White House these last 4 years, we would have missed out on some amazing real fascism, like the president forcing its people to inject themselves with vaccines that were never truly tested. How dare you question the efficacy of vaccines? How dare you question science? The government doesn't lie. Jesus said, love your neighbor. And you can only love your neighbor by injecting yourself with a vaccine that may or may not work. And you'll still get COVID and still spread it, but dang it, we put a lot of work into it. Now give them your arm and we'll tell you if the vaccine works later. Or what about the Biden-Harris removing Trump's Remain in Mexico policy? Remember that? How else would we have gotten all that beautiful fentanyl smuggled across the border that's killing hundreds of thousands of young people? Not to mention the increase of migrant crimes that are devastating American citizens. Yeah, it sounds bad, but come on, these criminals, they need to make a living too. They're just like you and me, you see? Trying to make the world a better place, one death at a time. And speaking about death, let's not forget about the pullout from Afghanistan. Yes, the Kamala-approved pullout from Afghanistan. Sure, Americans died, and sure, we left $7 billion worth of equipment back there, but not to worry. We left the military equipment in the hands of some trustworthy people. The Taliban. Yes, it may sound like President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris may have made some pretty bad decisions, but let's face it, nobody is perfect. And leading the country, well, those are some pretty big shoes to fill. Sure, inflation has gone up under the Biden-Harris administration, hurting millions of Americans, but let's face it, you need to count your blessings because you could have it bad and have a crack addict son who sells paintings for millions of dollars and uses that money on hookers, all the while picking up bags of cash from illegal business dealings overseas, and then uses your dad's name to blackmail people. But that's neither here nor there, because Joe Biden loves his son, Hunter. Aww. Let's face it, we all make mistakes. We sometimes forget to turn the stove off. We sometimes forget to pick up the kids from school. Hell, we sometimes forget to take the baby out of a burning hot car on a summer's day. But don't worry, post-birth abortions are no different than pre-birth abortions. So if the mother rules it's not a murder, then when the dust has settled, only the mother has the ability to decide if a baby's life matters. Well, the mother and her doctor, of course, because we all know doctors have the moral high ground and are right about everything, just like when they were right about COVID vaccines working perfectly. We all make mistakes, right? Like taking vaccines and getting pregnant. Just a couple of whoopsies in our bodies. But in the end, what really matters here is what we want to tell our kids, the future generation of the United States, 10, 20, 30 years from now. Well, at least the kids not being aborted, of course. But let's see, if the country is still around, what do we want to teach the future generations about this election? Do we want to teach them that if you work hard and make good choices and are smart with your money, and if you successfully avoid being assassinated nearly 3 times, and come on, also avoid porn stars named Stormy, for the love of all things holy, you too can help the working class citizens of the United States make a living, live out their American dream, raise a family however you choose, without the government getting involved. Or do you want to teach the future generation that in order to reach high positions of power in government, you have to sleep with the mayor of San Francisco, and you just need to claim to be an underrepresented minority, claim victimhood status as a woman, and speak ill of the country you claim has oppressed you, all the while accepting the financial benefits from said country that is propping you up through the liberal media bias and through basically all of Hollywood with their has-been celebrities with barely any ounce of moral clarity. Well, I guess the choice is a no-brainer. We need a fry cook. One that has actually worked a fry cook machine say at McDonald's? Let's vote a fry cook for president. And I don't mean SpongeBob SquarePants. My name is Andrew Reyes, and this is Faith in Politics with me, Andrew Reyes. Part 1, Evil and Suffering. Welcome back to the show. I know it's been a very long time since I've put out a new episode, but it feels good to be back. And boy, there has been a lot in the political news since the last episode, and I wish I could comment on all of it, but I can't. There's just too much. And since I went long in the opening, I'm going to keep the rest of the episode short and sweet. I'm going to try to keep it short and sweet. But I got some long video clips. But first, if you're listening, please be sure to like, subscribe, follow the show wherever you listen so you can be notified of a new episode. And actually, I'm thinking about, I might be taking a break for a little bit. So I'm just going to call this season 1 or something. But yeah, I think I'm going to take a break after this one. I wanted to put this one out right before the election, on election day, just to put something out there, to give you something to listen to. But with that said, I also want to very quick just plug in my other podcast real fast. If you don't like this podcast about religion and politics, please check out my other podcast called Simple Times Podcast. I do that show with my longtime friend Marcelo, and we simply just talk about random, simple things of everyday life. We do not talk about politics or anything in the religious sense. That's more of an entertaining show. We try to be entertaining over there. So it's a little more fun. It's like a buddy podcast. I'm going to coin that phrase there. It's a buddy podcast. But yeah, check it out. Simple Times Podcast. Now, with that out of the way, let's talk about today's topic, evil and suffering. Man, evil and suffering. It's not an easy topic by any stretch of the imagination to talk about, let alone to deal with. I've heard many stories of suffering, people suffering from friends, family, coworkers, just absolute tragedies. There's so many things that happen in the world that cause so much suffering. I've seen loved ones suffering. I witnessed my own mother suffering with her health for many years, leading to her untimely passing 4 years ago, which was a very difficult thing for me to go through. It was a rough, hard experience. When my kids are suffering, say from an accidental injury, like falling off a bike or, just tripping and falling, I hurt inside because I just wish it didn't have to happen to them. I've seen family pets pass away. It's just, that suffering of a loved one that's gone now. It's a hard thing to lose something, especially when it's something or something that cannot be replaced. The question for this episode is, why does God allow evil to take place or suffering to take place? Why do bad things happen? Why would a good God allow bad things to happen to good people? Well, after researching on this topic, I've concluded that there really is no simple answer. At least there isn't any good, satisfying answer. It's very complicated. The subject is multifaceted, for lack of a better term. But I remember hearing this answer from a pastor and author of the popular book, Reason for God? No, Reason for God? I should have looked that up a little bit better. But anyway, he gave this answer, which I thought was somewhat reasonable, if not useful for those who question why God would allow suffering. The author's name is Tim Keller, so I just want to play this clip from Tim Keller. It's his response when asked about the Christian outlook on suffering. Little warning, it's an 8-minute clip. It's a little long, but it's a good response. So here it is.
I went through 8 years of Catholic school, Sisters of Charity, and I got professional religious education throughout all those 8 years. Then I had 4 years of Jesuit prep school. And at the end of 12 years of religious education, I was an atheist. And then I came to Columbia. The sticking point in all that regarding religion for me was the Holocaust. I looked at that and I said, how is it possible that 6 million people could be exterminated in the course of a war that took 80 million lives, and there could be a God? How do you answer that question?
I'm going to push back and ask you, there sounds like there's two motives behind the question. Maybe they're both true for you. They're both very important questions. One is how could European civilization, which is based on Christianity for 1,000 years, produce something like that? Or was it much more general, and that is, how in the world could God allow that kind of evil and suffering?
That's the question I want.
The second one.
Yeah, the second one. Much more interesting.
Well, the first one is a terrible question too. I mean, it's a terrible question to answer for a Christian minister. But as a pastor, I have to say that the Holocaust is awful, and yet as a pastor for the last 35 years, I've been sitting in rooms with people, as a pastor, with parents whose little, 2-year-old get run over by a car. I mean, it doesn't seem like a Holocaust, but it's the same kind of misery, the same question. Right. Why in the world would God allow evil and suffering? So I've been through it and through it and through it and through it. The right response to anyone who's actually in the middle of suffering is silence and love and speaking when spoken to. I actually don't believe it makes it any easier to handle or face suffering by disbelieving in God. And I actually do Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from Birmingham jail. He says, how do you know that a human deed is unjust, or a law? But he's talking about love. How do you know a human law or deed is unjust? Only if there's a higher law that says it's unjust. Otherwise, what you've got out there is the strong eat the weak. That's how you and I got here. If there's no God, you and I came here through stronger organisms eating the weak organisms, natural selection. That's what life's about. That's utterly natural. Now, deep in our hearts, we feel, no, that's not right. But, the question is why? Now, what Martin Luther King Jr. was saying is, we believe that strong eating the weak is unjust and wrong because there's a higher law. If there was no higher law, he says, how do you even really justify your outrage?
And yet the strong eat the weak every single day.
Yes.
So why doesn't God intervene and say, you know what? You can't kill all those people. Stop it.
Well, I said there were two responses. The first response only is that it doesn't make it any easier. I mean, it really doesn't, because now, on what basis am I morally outraged? If strong eating the weak is natural, so what? So they did it. Stronger nations eat weaker nations, stronger individuals. So what's the big deal? What's the problem? I mean, That's fair. I mean, I mean it's not a complete answer, but it's fair to say, yeah, now as an atheist, now how am I dealing with evil and suffering? Now I really have only a visceral reaction to it. I don't even have a real cogent warrant for saying this is absolutely got to stop, other than I don't like it. But the second is, now you were raised, I mean, you went to Catholic school. The Christian view of God is very different than the other views of God, because the Christian view of God is that God came into this world and suffered. Now, I have a cat, and my wife and I love our cat, and we actually saw it once. We broke its leg by accident, but we fixed it for only $1,000, which we never in a million years would have thought we would ever do for a cat. But
well, you broke it, so
we broke the cat.
You're kind of morally obligated.
And it suffered. It suffered. However, I think it's fair to say, because it doesn't have the same kind of self-consciousness, I would say that a human being suffering is probably at least sort of some kind of higher order. You're more aware of things. There's more agony than a. If God really came to earth in Jesus Christ, and the suffering he went through on the cross voluntarily would have been far beyond my suffering. Now, what does that do? It does not. Even after you believe that God would have come down and become vulnerable to suffering and death, that does not yet give us an answer to the question of what the reason is that God allows evil and suffering. But it does tell us what the reason isn't. It can't be that he doesn't love us, or he wouldn't have come down and gotten involved. It can't be that he doesn't care, or he wouldn't be involved. I don't know what the reason is he hasn't stopped it yet, but it can't be it can't be a remoteness, it can't be indifference, or he wouldn't have come and gotten down involved. Now that assumes you believe the gospel. But if you believe the gospel, what it does is it keeps off the idea of indifference and says, I don't know why he hasn't stopped evil and suffering. But whatever the reason is, it can't just be indifference, hardness of heart, or lack of
Well,
love.
have you thought about it in terms of, the reason?
I mean,
Why didn't he come down and stop the Holocaust?
I don't know. But now,
right.
at this point, you've got to ask yourself a question. If you can't think of a reason, does that mean there really can't be one? That's the Alvin Plantinga. Right. Have you heard the no-seeums? Oh, this is good. You'll like this. Okay.
Lay it on me.
All right. Well, now, you're an academic, so you realize philosophers talk like this. Neither of us are really philosophers, but you do know how they talk.
I do indeed.
Okay. He says, if you look into a pup tent and I ask you, do you see any St. Bernards? And if you don't see any St. Bernards, you say, no, I don't see any St. Bernards, then we can safely conclude there probably are no St. Bernards in the tent, because if there were a St. Bernard in the tent, you'd probably see it. But he said, if you look into a pup tent and I say, do you see any no-see-ums? Now, no-see-ums, if you live near the Great Lakes, are little gnats that are so small they come through the screen and bite you anyway. And he says, so if you look into the pup tent and I say, do you see any no-see-ums? And you say, no, I don't see any see-ums. I don't see any no-see-ums. That doesn't mean that there aren't any no-see-ums in there, because if there were, you couldn't see them. And he says, now, when you say, because I can't think of any good reason why God would continue to allow evil and suffering to happen, therefore there can't be one, you're assuming that whatever reasons there would be more like St. Bernard's than no-see-ums. Well, why should it be? I mean, he says this is probably cold comfort. Without the gospel of Jesus Christ coming into the earth and coming alongside of us, it's cold comfort. But what he's saying is you can't assume that just because you can't think of a good reason why God hasn't stopped it yet, there can't be any. And then the gospel says, well, whatever that reason would be, it can't be a lack of love.
It's not an easy answer, but I appreciate Tim Keller's response. That just because bad things happen to us, or we suffer, or see evil in the world, that it's not because God doesn't care or doesn't love us, or because of lack of love from God's part. Because the gospel, or good news of Jesus, is that he suffered and died for the sins of the world in order to restore the relationship of God and humankind. the unfortunate part is that we live in a fallen world. God is perfect. God created man in his image. Man sinned against God, causing a separation with God. Because, well, God can't be associated with sin because God is holy. But God creates a way to restore us back to him through Jesus, God's Son, who Jesus suffered tremendously on the cross. And then, after 3 days, the story goes, he rose from the grave, creating a new way by the grace of God to be restored to him. Now, I know it doesn't erase evil and suffering, but what it does create is a new faith, hope, and love in us to be able to work through evil and suffering that we may face. Part 2. Stand-up comedian Trump. Okay, wow. I think that part 1 was pretty heavy. And I don't want to leave you guys on a sad note. So to turn it all around, I want to leave you all with something funny and light. Now, there was a lot of Trump news, which was worthy of commenting on since the last episode. News from Trump working at McDonald's to Trump and his garbage truck to how a squirrel named Peanut was euthanized by a government agency, which turned into a driving force in the last days of Trump's presidential campaign. Believe me, I know what you're thinking. I wish I was making all of that stuff up right now, but I swear I'm not. I wish I could have delved deep into those topics of discussion on the podcast, but, it's election day now, and I just don't have the time or the energy. But so instead, I'm going to leave you with Trump basically doing stand-up comedy. Now, this is from the Al Smith dinner last month in October. If you don't know what the Al Smith dinner is, it's basically a white tie dinner in New York City held annually to raise funds for Catholic charities that support children in various needs. What was odd during this year's event is that typically the president attends and gives a speech, which would have been great for Kamala Harris to attend, which would have been a good look for her if she wanted to get more Catholic votes for her presidential run, but she was nowhere in sight. And Trump used that in his speech to his advantage, which basically turned out to be a stand-up routine. I have the clip here. This is like highlights or the best moments of that, of Trump's stand-up is what I'm going to call it. So here, check it out.
Tradition holds that I'm supposed to tell a few self-deprecating jokes this evening. So here it goes. Nope, I've got nothing. I've got nothing. There's nothing to say. I guess I just don't see the point of taking shots at myself when other people have been shooting at me for a hell of a long time and they shoot at. But I know this isn't my normal crowd tonight because it just isn't. It's not my normal crowd. Believe me, my normal crowd is younger, has a lot more energy, but you have certain advantages too, like cash, lots of cash. But many of you are Manhattan liberals from the media and the Democrat Party. I always say the Democrat, Chuck doesn't like that. He likes Democratic, and it sounds much more beautiful. The Democratic Party. I always say the Democrat Party because it sounds worse. It is true. He likes Democratic. Why don't they just change the name? This way, it is Democrat. But I must say I was shocked when I heard that Kamala was skipping the Al Smith dinner. I'd really hoped that she would come because we can't get enough of hearing her beautiful laugh. She laughs like crazy. We would recognize it any place in this room, and all polls are indicating I'm leading big with the Catholic vote, as I should be. But I don't think Kamala has given up yet. She hasn't. Instead of attending tonight, she's in Michigan receiving communion from Gretchen Whitmer. That's not a pretty sight. But Catholics, please don't be too insulted by Kamala's absence. If the Democrats, he says, thank you very much, I appreciate it. If Democrats really wanted to have someone not be with us this evening, they would have just sent Joe Biden. He's having second thoughts, you know that, right? He wants to come back. If she does any worse in the polls, they're going to bring him back again, I think. Chuck, he's going to do it. He's the one that got him out. That's the guy. Much more so than Crazy Nancy, I will tell you. Because I know him. He did it. Joe has almost disappeared from view. The only way he could be seen less is if he had a show on CNN. They had nothing. They've got nothing. Fake news, right? Fake. Chuck Schumer is here looking very glum. Doesn't he look glum? He looks glum. But look on the bright side, Chuck, considering how woke your party has become. If Kamala loses, you still have a chance to become the first woman president. And I said, do you mind if I do that? He said, no, you got to do what you got to do. He's a pro. He's a professional. No, he's a good man, actually. I hate to say it. Don't ever use it against me, please. I'll say this dinner was really setting me back when I say it now, but I've known him a long time. There's a group called White Dudes for Harris. Have you seen this? White Dudes for Harris. Anybody know? Are some of you here? White Dudes for Harris. Doesn't sound like it. But I'm not worried about them at all because their wives and their wives' lovers are all voting for me. I didn't like Biden very much, and now I like him quite a bit. And now I say that she's much worse than him. He was a much better candidate than her, actually. And when we hopefully win, dispose of her, I like her a lot, but right now I can't stand her. It's true. I can't stand her. A lot of people don't like it. The only piece of advice I would have for her in the event that she wins would be not to let her husband, Doug, anywhere near the nannies. Just keep them away. I'd like to thank our MC this evening, Jim Gaffigan. Most recently, Jim has been playing Tim Waltz on Saturday Night Live. And that'll be a very short gig, I hope, Jim. But it was fun while it lasted, wasn't it? Let's see how that lasts. Right? It better be quick. We don't want him, and I'm not going to say anymore. But unfortunately, Governor Waltz isn't here himself, but don't worry, he'll say that he was. He's going to say he was. I used to think the Democrats were crazy for saying that men have periods, but then I met Tim Waltz.
And there you have it, folks. Happy Election Day. May the best man or woman win. And may all the votes be only from actual living U.S. citizens. And of course, don't forget, keep up the faith.